as the gilded hum of the waking world slowly surrenders to the velvet eclipse of the infinite cosmos, an invitation manifests within the quiet sanctuary of the mind. The frantic rhythms of the day dissolve into the sublime tapestry of the past, where time itself loses its relentless edge and flows like a calm, unhurried river through the forgotten valleys of human memory. We turn our awareness away from the brilliant glare of the immediate present, stepping instead into the cool, protective shadows of centuries long gone, where the great dreamers and quiet titans of history found their ultimate solace in the profound serenity of the midnight hour. Let the weight of your immediate surroundings soften into a gentle, weightless presence, allowing the heavy blankets of the night to wrap around your consciousness like an ancient, protective cloak, as we embark on a continuous, uninterrupted voyage across the peaceful landscapes of vanished eras. The bitter winter of the year 174 of the Central Era held the frozen, unyielding reaches of the northern frontier in a silent, icy embrace along the winding banks of the Danube River. Outside the heavy, multi-layered canvas of the Imperial Military Pavilion, a soft, continuous snow drifted through the dark Pannonian night, accumulating on the pine needles and the rough earth, absorbing every stray sound and wrapping the entire Roman encampment in an absolute, deep hush. Inside this secluded sanctuary, the vast, tumultuous world of empires, senates, and shifting battle lines was reduced to the gentle, amber luminescence of a single, slender beeswax candle. The miniature golden flame flickered with a quiet grace, casting elongated rhythmic shadows that danced softly across the leather-lined walls of the emperor's private tent. Marcus Aurelius sat upon a rustic wooden stool, his weary frame draped in a dark, weathered purple cloak that bore the faint scent of campfire smoke, old iron, and the crisp frost of the wilderness. His hands, which had carried the immense responsibilities of millions of souls across 3 vast continents, held a slender reed pen with a delicate, practiced grip. The only sound within the perimeter of his tent was the soothing, almost hypnotic scratch of the quill moving across a fresh, textured sheet of smooth Egyptian parchment. The air was thick with the comforting, nostalgic aroma of aged leather, dried pine boughs, and the rich, warm essence of slowly melting wax, creating an environment untouched by the grand, echoing marble corridors of Rome or the demanding voices of the crowded forum. Here, at the edge of the known world, the philosopher king sought no praise, no triumphs, and no golden crowns. He sought only the absolute solitude of the midnight hour to restore the natural balance of his own spirit. Every breath he took was deep, slow, and completely deliberate, matching the unhurried movement of his pen as he recorded his most private thoughts, not for the eyes of posterity, but as a therapeutic meditation to calm his own mind before the onset of sleep. Just beyond the heavy leather flaps of the pavilion, the dark waters of the Danube River meandered silently through the misty landscape, a heavy, black ribbon under a sky that resembled an endless expanse of dark blue velvet, studded with the cold, distant diamond brilliance of 1,000 ancient stars. The great river moved with an unstoppable, majestic momentum, its quiet, continuous murmur serving as a natural lullaby for the thousands of battle-weary legionaries sleeping deeply in their leather tents throughout the vast encampment. Along the snowy banks, the orange embers of dying watchfires glowed like fallen stars in the midnight mist, while motionless sentinels stood like iron statues, their long spears catching the faint, silvery reflection of the crescent moon. Across the wide water lay the silent, unexplored depths of the Germanic forests, a vast ocean of shadow and ancient pine trees stretching into the infinite north, completely still and at peace under the protective gaze of the night. The emperor looked up from his parchment, his eyelids heavy with a beautiful, natural fatigue, yet his inner awareness remained crystal clear, anchored entirely in the absolute reality of the present moment. He reflected upon the river, visualizing the water flowing from unseen mountain springs, journeying through distant plains, and eventually dissolving without a trace into the boundless sea. And he recognized that time itself was exactly like this current, a swift, irreversible torrent of events where everything that appears is instantly swept away into oblivion, only to be replaced by another passing wave. As the candle within the Roman pavilion burned lower, the smooth trajectory of our journey shifts effortlessly, drifting southward away from the frozen northern rivers, crossing the warm, whispering currents of the wine-dark Mediterranean Sea under the steady guidance of the midnight stars, until we touched down softly upon the ancient, shimmering white shores of Egypt. Here, the great city of Alexandria slept deeply beneath a heavy canopy of starlight, its grand avenues and white marble monuments bathed in a serene, silver glow that softened the sharp lines of reality. Inside the immense, vaulted stone walls of the royal library, the silence was vast, reverent, and complete, an absolute sanctuary where the chaotic noise of commerce, politics, and human ambition simply ceased to exist. Rows upon rows of dark cedarwood shelves stretched upward into the high, vaulted ceilings, holding within their protective grid millions of papyrus and parchment scrolls that contained the collective wisdom, poetry, and scientific observations of 100 vanished civilizations. Ephraim, an elderly scribe whose hair had turned the color of fine winter frost, walked with slow, measured steps through the long, echoing galleries of the library, his woven leather sandals making no sound against the polished granite floor beneath him. In his right hand, he carried a small, beautifully cast bronze oil lamp, its tiny, golden flame casting a soft, warm circle of amber light that illuminated the faded titles and precise inscriptions on the edges of the cedar shelves. The atmosphere within the library was rich and deeply comforting, saturated with the nostalgic scent of dried river reeds, aromatic cedar oils, and the dry, pleasant dust of centuries-old thoughts waiting patiently in the dark. To the old scribe, this place felt intensely alive, as if the quiet air itself was pregnant with the gentle whispers of dead poets, astronomers, and philosophers who had spent their lives searching for the underlying harmony of existence. He reached the grand, arched window at the end of the long corridor and rested his weathered hands against the cool, smooth marble of the sill, looking out into the tranquil, indigo harbor. Just beyond the massive stone walls of the city, the sea rolled with a soft, deeply hypnotic cadence, its gentle, dark waves lapping rhythmically against the rocky foundations of the Pharaoh's lighthouse. In the distance, the legendary tower stood as a silent, benevolent titan, its peak throwing a steady, magnificent beam of golden fire across the black expanse of the ocean, guiding unseen travelers toward a safe, unbothered haven. The midnight breeze that drifted through the window was cool, refreshing, and filled with the clean, sharp tang of sea salt, carrying with it the faint, rhythmic rustle of palm fronds swaying gently along the coastal promenades. Ephraim turned back toward his heavy oak desk, set down his bronze lamp, and carefully unrolled a delicate, beautifully preserved celestial scroll that had been copied decades ago from a rare Babylonian original. The surface of the papyrus was covered in elegant, geometric diagrams of the cosmos, meticulously drawn with deep indigo and midnight black soot dyes, while tiny, exquisite pieces of gold leaf had been pressed onto the page to represent the fixed stars and the slowly wandering planets. With a soft, slender reed brush, the scribe began to add small, precise annotations along the margin, his hand moving with a graceful, unhurried fluidness that mirrored the slow turning of the constellations above his head. The only sound in his quiet study alcove was the gentle, soothing hiss of the brush moving against the fibrous paper, a soft, repetitive whisper that seemed to echo the absolute peace of the empty night. He looked at the golden constellation of Orion mapped upon the scroll, and reflected on how these very same stars had watched over the ancient pharaohs, how they looked down upon his quiet work tonight, and how they would continue to shine long after his own name had been carried away by the desert winds. This perspective brought an immense, immovable sense of tranquility to his heart, removing the small, daily anxieties of mortal life and replacing them with a profound realization that he was a harmonious, beautifully protected part of a grand and eternal order. As the oil in the bronze lamp slowly reached its natural end, the silver light of the Egyptian moon took over the room, casting a soft, ethereal glow over the desk and the brush, while the elderly scribe stepped away from his work to lay down upon his simple linen cot, surrendering his awareness entirely to the deep, comforting dark. And as that ancient library dissolves into the silver mist of the Mediterranean, the continuous current of our journey carries us further east, drifting across vast continents and dark, silent mountain ranges until we find ourselves resting within the mist-covered valleys of ancient Kyoto, Japan. The year was 1482, and the old capital city slept profoundly beneath a velvet canopy of brilliant stars, its wooden temples and hidden gardens wrapped in an absolute, sacred quietness. High up on the forested slopes of the Arashiyama Mountains, the air was remarkably crisp and clean, carrying the rich, grounding aroma of damp earth, wet green moss, and the subtle, clean sweetness of wild mountain pine boughs. Kenji, an elderly Zen monk and master calligrapher, walked with slow, perfectly balanced steps along a narrow stone pathway that wound through the very heart of the monumental bamboo forest. His woven straw sandals made a faint, rhythmic, and deeply soothing crunch against the damp gravel, a repetitive sound that seemed to enhance rather than break the immense silence of the wilderness. In his right hand, he carried a simple, spherical paper lantern that cast a soft, warm candle glow around his feet, illuminating the smooth, jade-green surfaces of the towering bamboo stalks that rose like straight, ancient pillars into the dark midnight sky. As a gentle evening breeze swept through the secluded valley, the massive bamboo stalks began to sway in a slow, hypnotic coordination, rubbing against one another to produce a deep, dry and velvet rustling sound, a continuous, whispering melody that filled the darkness like the soft, distant waves of a peaceful ocean. Kenji reached the end of the stone path and stepped through the weathered wooden gates of his small, isolated mountaintop cloister, where a soft, misty autumn rain was just beginning to fall from the silent heavens. It was not a storm of violence, but a gentle, predictable drizzle that blanketed the entire mountain in a quiet, soothing hush, the tiny droplets falling upon the wide, tilted eaves of the cedarwood roof to produce a steady, rhythmic patter that reverberated softly through the open wooden corridors. The monk walked along the polished wooden veranda, the smooth, dark cedar beneath his bare feet offering a cool and comforting connection to the earth, grounding his spirit entirely in the immediate reality of the night. He paused for a moment to watch the rain droplets fall into a large, hollowed-out stone water basin nestled among the wild ferns, watching the water fill the basin to its absolute brim until it overflowed silently, dripping smoothly onto the dark river pebbles below in a continuous, unchanging loop of natural harmony. Entering his minimalist study room, where the floor was covered in smooth, thick tatami mats that filled the air with the pleasant, dry fragrance of natural straw and summer grass, Kenji lit a single stick of sandalwood incense. Its thin, delicate ribbon of pale blue smoke curled lazily toward the dark timber rafters, filling the sanctuary with a rich, calming, and deeply comforting aroma that invited total mental detachment. He took a heavy, slate-ink stone, added a few drops of pure water from a bamboo cup, and began to grind a solid block of traditional pine soot ink against the stone in slow, continuous clockwise circles. The soft, scraping sound of the ink block was a rhythmic, hypnotic whisper, a repetitive cadence that matched the absolute peace of his inner mind, turning the act of preparation into a deep, meditative rest. Once the ink had transformed into a rich, velvet black liquid, he dipped his large, soft bamboo brush into it, unrolled a long sheet of handmade mulberry paper, and with an absolute, unwavering focus, drew a single, perfect circle, the symbol of completeness, emptiness, and the eternal present moment. The brush moved with a soft, sliding hiss, an effortless motion that captured the very essence of the quiet mountain night, leaving a trace of absolute beauty on the page before he put down his tool, walked to his simple futon mattress, and allowed his heavy eyelids to close, fading deeply into a dreamless, unbothered slumber. And as the last echoes of the mountain temple fade into the silver fog of quiet memory, the continuous, unhurried current of our midnight odyssey carries us across vast oceans of shifting time, drifting over whispering northern seas, until we touch down softly upon the immense, open plains of prehistoric Britain. The year was 2000 before the Central Era, and the great Salisbury Plain slept profoundly beneath a limitless ocean of silent, glittering stars. The absolute quietness of the open grasslands was vast, protective, and complete, a beautiful void where the ticking clocks of the modern world had not yet been born. Eldrin, an elderly astronomer and sacred guardian of the great stone calendar, walked with slow, perfectly measured steps along the circular earthen bank that surrounded the majestic monument of Stonehenge. His heavy cloak, woven from thick, natural sheep's wool, brushed softly against the tall, dew-kissed summer grass, producing a faint, rhythmic, and deeply soothing hiss that blended seamlessly into the nocturnal silence. In his right hand, he carried a simple clay vessel holding a low-burning tallow flame, its soft, golden light dancing gently across the rough, heavily textured surfaces of the colossal sarsen stones that stood in a perfect, eternal circle against the midnight sky. The air across the open plain was extraordinarily crisp and cool, filled with the rich, wild aroma of crushed clover, damp earth, and the sweet freshness of the midnight wind as it swept unobstructed from the distant coastline. To Eldrin, these massive, looming monoliths were not cold, lifeless rock. They were a living, breathing bridge between human awareness and the infinite architecture of the cosmos. Every single stone had been shaped, dragged for miles across the rolling hills, and raised with absolute, deliberate precision to track the very breathing of the universe, aligning the earth beneath his feet with the movements of the sky above. He walked slowly into the center of the inner stone horseshoe, stepping over the soft, dark shadows cast by the massive lintels bridging the pillars high above his head. He approached the great altar stone, its smooth, dark surface cool to his touch, offering a profound sense of grounding and timeless stability. Leaning back slightly against the ancient stone, he looked up through the narrow vertical gaps of the sarsen arches, direct toward the northeastern horizon where the land met the velvet canopy of space. This specific opening had been aligned centuries ago with the absolute precision of master craftsmen to track the turning of the seasons. But tonight, the stone window held a different, quiet treasure. The constellation of the Great Bear turned slowly above the pillars, its 7 bright stars acting as a celestial clock for the deep night, moving in a predictable, perfect harmony that no earthly chaos could ever disturb. Eldrin dipped a small piece of natural charcoal onto a smooth slate tablet, marking the changing position of the constellations with slow, methodical lines. The soft, dry scratch of the charcoal against the slate was a comforting, repetitive whisper, a rhythmic cadence that matched the slow, steady beating of his own heart. Looking out at that vast, indigo vault, he realized that the movements of the planets and stars were perfectly orderly, secure, and safe, and that in the grand geometry of the universe, the brief troubles of mortal lives were beautifully minor, temporary, and at peace. As the tiny flame within his clay vessel finally exhausted its fuel, vanishing into the darkness with a soft, tiny wisp of white smoke. The entire monument of Stonehenge was left completely illuminated by the natural, silver radiance of the midnight starlight. The old astronomer walked slowly to his small shelter of deerskin and pine timber near the western bank and lay down, pulling a thick, soft woolen blanket up to his chin. He released one last, long and grateful breath of absolute surrender, allowing his eyes to close naturally as his spirit drifted away into the deep, dark, and tranquil ocean of a dreamless sleep, leaving the ancient monoliths to their silent, eternal vigil under the British sky. The continuous thread of our midnight journey drifts southward once more, crossing the cooling currents of the Atlantic Ocean to slip effortlessly into the warm, aromatic, and deeply peaceful embrace of medieval Andalusia. The 10th century of the Central Era was at its height, and the prosperous city-state of Cordoba glittered softly beneath a heavy blanket of deep midnight blue. Inside a secluded courtyard, hidden behind a plain wooden door, the chaotic noise of the bustling markets and political courts had completely dissolved into a profound, golden stillness. The walls of the courtyard were caked in a smooth, cream-white plaster that reflected the gentle radiance of the crescent moon, while thick vines of climbing jasmine and dark green-orange blossoms spiraled up wooden lattices, filling the midnight air with a rich, sweet, and deeply comforting perfume. In the absolute center of the tiled space, a beautifully carved marble fountain trickled with a soft, continuous, and deeply hypnotic cadence, the water rising in small, clear arcs before falling back into a smooth stone basin, creating a steady, natural melody that reverberated gently through the arched stone alcoves. Zaid, a patient astronomer and philosopher of the great university, sat comfortably upon a thick woven silk cushion resting on the cool marble floor, his long linen robes pooling around him in soft, undisturbed folds. The polished geometric tiles beneath him reflected the distant sparkle of the stars, creating the illusion that he was floating within the very center of the celestial sphere. In his lap, he held a heavy, leather-bound volume, a rare translation of ancient fables and mathematical proofs that had traveled across the Silk Road to find a home in his private library. The air around his desk smelled of iron-gall ink, dried saffron, and the clean, woody aroma of cedarwood oils used to preserve the precious pages. Holding a slender reed pen with a relaxed, graceful grip, Zaid added a few delicate notes to the wide margins of the text, the soft, sliding hiss of the nib against the thick paper acting as a repetitive, soothing lullaby for his own mind. Beside him, a beautifully hammered brass astrolabe rested on a low cedar table, its intricate plates and graduated circles catching the silver moonlight, mirroring the grand clockwork of the night sky in a single, tangible object. He looked down into the dark, still pool of the fountain basin, watching the reflection of the stars quiver slightly with each falling droplet of water, and he felt a deep, unwavering comfort in the absolute permanence of the cosmic order. The empires of the earth might rise and fall like waves upon the shore, and the grand ambitions of men might vanish like smoke in the wind, but the mathematical harmony of the universe remained steadfast, an eternal sanctuary of truth and peace. Zaid carefully closed the leather volume, put down his reed pen, and let his hands rest openly on his knees, breathing in the cool, jasmine-scented air of the Andalusian night. He rose with slow, unhurried movements, walked to a simple debed nestled within a shaded stone archway, and lay down beneath a soft linen sheet, releasing all the lingering thoughts of his studies into the quiet dark, as his consciousness dissolved smoothly into a deep, restful, and completely unbothered slumber. And as the trickling waters of Cordoba slowly merge into the silver mist of the past, the continuous, flowing nehir of our journey carries us further along the ancient pathways of the world, drifting across vast expanses of rolling sand dunes until we touch down softly within a majestic desert oasis along the historic Silk Road. The night sky above the desert was an infinite, dark blue vault filled with a brilliant, silver dust of stars that seemed to touch the very edges of the earth, illuminating the undulating slopes of the sand dunes until they resembled a motionless, golden sea caked in frost. The absolute silence of the desert was immense, deep, and protective, broken only by the faint, rhythmic rustling of a few lonely date palms swaying gently in the cool evening wind. Near the edge of a half-collapsed stone cistern from a forgotten era, a small caravan of nomadic traders slept deeply, their camels resting in a protective semicircle, their slow, heavy breathing creating a steady, comforting pulse in the stillness. Soraya, a traveling scholar who had spent years tracing the lost star charts of ancient Eastern empires, sat quietly by the low-burning embers of a small tamarisk wood fire, her dark traveling cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The air smelled of faint wood smoke, sweet dried dates, and the clean, dry dust of the open desert, creating an environment of total simplicity and profound detachment from the busy cities she had left behind. In her hands, she held a slender, jade-green leather notebook, its pages filled with elegant, hand-drawn diagrams of the lunar cycles and the shifting horizons of the desert terrain. She did not read to analyze or to study tonight. She simply let her eyes drift across the flowing lines of ink, using the familiar shapes as a visual meditation to quiet the final remnants of her active thoughts. The dying embers of the fire glowed with a soft, rhythmic warmth, casting a gentle crimson light over her hands and the sand at her feet, a low burning hearth in the vast emptiness of the wilderness. She leaned her head back against her camel saddle, looking up at the majestic silver crescent moon that hung suspended like a delicate lantern above the dunes, and she felt a deep, immovable sense of safety within the immense scale of the desert night. Here, amidst the shifting sands that swallowed roads and empires alike, she realized that true peace was not found in a permanent place, but in the quiet capacity to find a home within one's own breath, beneath the universal canopy of the stars. Soraya closed her notebook, let her hands rest completely relaxed in her lap, and closed her eyes, listening to the soft, velvet sigh of the wind as it moved through the desert grass, carrying away the last whispers of the day and guiding her soul into a deep, tranquil, and beautifully dreamless rest. And as the velvet sands of the desert oasis slowly dissolve into the deep sapphire mist of a quiet midnight memory, the ceaseless, rhythmic nehir of our journey winds gracefully southward, crossing the towering, snow-capped barriers of the great mountain passes to emerge onto the lush, fragrance-filled plains of ancient India. The year was 1656, and the magnificent riverfront pavilions of Agra slept profoundly beneath a warm, indigo sky that was completely caked in the brilliant silver dust of the winter constellations. The absolute serenity of the sprawling gardens was vast, protective, and untouched by the grand politics of the royal court, creating a private universe where the passing hours were measured only by the changing shadows of the marble arches. Ananda, an elderly astronomer and designer of cosmic instruments, walked with slow, fluid steps along the polished red sandstone terrace that ran parallel to the quiet currents of the Yamuna River. His fine cotton robes, soft and light as a summer cloud, brushed silently against the cool stone, creating a faint, velvet rustle that seemed to deepen the majestic hush of the night. In his right hand, he held a delicate brass oil lamp fashioned in the shape of a lotus flower, its miniature golden flame casting a warm, steady circle of light across the smooth surfaces of the great stone astrolabes built directly into the terrace floors. The air within the riverfront garden was heavy with the rich, intoxicating perfume of nocturnal jasmine, crushed rose petals, and the clean, woody aroma of sandalwood paste cooling in the night air. To the old scholar, these massive marble and sandstone instruments were not static architecture. They were a living, silent orchestra designed to capture the eternal music of the spheres, mapping the infinite geometry of the heavens onto the mortal earth below. He reached the edge of the terrace, where the stone balustrade overlooked the mirror-like surface of the Yamuna River, resting his calloused hands on the cool marble rail to look out into the serene, misty darkness. Just across the black water, the magnificent white marble domes of the great mausoleum rose like a pale, ethereal cloud, suspended between the earth and the stars, their perfect symmetry glowing softly under the radiant silver light of the half-moon. The river moved with a heavy, completely silent momentum, an unhurried, graceful current that carried the reflections of the stars like spilled silver coins, floating away into the deep dark of the eastern plains. Ananda watched the undisturbed water, letting his own breathing match the slow, heavy rhythm of the river's path, feeling the cool, refreshing dampness of the night air clearing the final remnants of analytical thought from his mind. He sat down upon a smooth silk carpet laid out in a shaded marble alcove, taking up a slender reed stylus and a clean sheet of heavy, handmade paper caked with a faint sheen of gold dust. With slow, rhythmic movements, he began to map the exact trajectory of the planet Venus as it descended toward the western horizon, the soft, sliding sound of the stylus against the paper acting as a repetitive, comforting whisper in the still night. He looked up at the vast, cosmic ceiling and realized that the very same laws that guided the brilliant path of the evening star were also guiding the quiet breathing of his own chest, anchoring his existence within a universe that was entirely orderly, safe, and beautifully balanced. There was no need to strive tonight, no grand monuments to build, and no distant horizons to conquer. The night had claimed the earth, and like the ancient river flowing beside him, his soul was invited to simply surrender to the natural current of rest, sinking deeper and deeper into the quiet safety of the present hour. And as the fragrant river breezes of Agra softly fade into the silver mist of the past, the continuous, flowing nehir of our journey carries us effortlessly back toward the west, crossing the dark Mediterranean waters to slip silently into the rolling, cypress-lined hills of Renaissance Tuscany. The year was 1580, and the ancient valley of the Arno River slept profoundly beneath a deep, velvet canopy of stars that threw a gentle, protective shadow over the terracotta roofs of Florence below. High up on a secluded hillside villa away from the crowded palazzos and busy artists' workshops, the absolute quietness of the olive groves was vast, reverent, and complete, a tranquil haven where the passage of time seemed to slow down to a perfect, unhurried crawl. Giovanni, an elderly painter and student of the natural sciences, walked with slow, deliberate steps along the stone loggia of his villa, his soft leather slippers making no sound against the worn cotto tiles beneath his feet. In his left hand, he carried a small, unadorned clay lamp filled with pure olive oil, its steady, golden flame casting a warm, amber glow over his long linen sleeves and the rough stone pillars of the arcade. The evening air was crisp and remarkably clean, saturated with the grounding aroma of dried rosemary, fresh earth, and the faint, sweet scent of burning oak logs from a distant hearth down in the valley. To the old artist, the dark landscape stretched out before him was a living canvas of absolute harmony, a physical manifestation of the divine proportions he spent his days trying to capture with his brushes and geometry tools. He leaned against the smooth stone balustrade, looking down at the distant silhouette of the city, where the great dome of the cathedral rose like a dark, silent mountain against the sapphire sky, its marble ribbing catching the faint, silvery light of the stars. The city below was completely hushed, its winding cobblestone streets and stone bridges wrapped in a thick, protective blue mist that softened the sharp lines of the grand architecture, turning the bustling center of human genius into a peaceful, sleeping entity. Giovanni watched the slow, orderly movement of the constellations as they turned above the Tuscan hills, letting his chest rise and fall in perfect synchronization with the quiet rhythm of the wilderness around him. He stepped into his high-ceilinged studio alcove, where a large wooden easel held a fresh sheet of thick, textured paper, and taking up a piece of soft red chalk, he began to sketch the elegant curves of a walnut leaf he found earlier that afternoon. The soft, sliding sound of the chalk against the heavy paper was a repetitive, comforting whisper, a rhythmic cadence that filled the small space with a sense of total focus and absolute peace, turning the final act of his day into a beautiful, quiet meditation. He looked at the simple lines on the page and reflected on how the very same geometric spirals found in a tiny leaf were mirrored in the grand rotation of the galaxies above. Realizing that he was a tiny but completely harmonious thread woven into the infinite fabric of a perfectly balanced cosmos. There were no more colors to mix tonight, no patrons to please, and no grand masterpieces to finish. His work was done, and the night had provided a sanctuary where his active thoughts could finally dissolve into the soft, protective shadows of the room, allowing his body to rest completely unburdened as he lay down upon his simple linen, dabbed and surrendered his spirit to the deep, dreamless quiet of the eternal night. And as the cypress-shadowed hills of Tuscany slowly melt into the silver fog of a quiet memory, the continuous, unhurried neigh of our journey carries us across the vast, rolling currents of the Atlantic Ocean, drifting over whispering coastal lagoons until we come to rest deep within the mist-shrouded rainforests of the ancient Yucatan Peninsula. The year was 750 of the Central Era, and the majestic stone temples of the great city of Palenque slept profoundly beneath a heavy indigo sky that was completely caked in the brilliant emerald dust of the Milky Way. The absolute silence of the deep jungle was vast, ancient, and protective, a living canopy where the passage of time was marked only by the slow, predictable cycles of the seasons and the stars. Cainish, an elderly priest and master astronomer of the Jaguar Court, walked with slow, perfectly balanced steps along the high, stone platform of the great tower observatory. His heavy robes, woven from soft cotton and adorned with jade beads, brushed silently against the smooth white limestone, creating a faint, rhythmic cadence that seemed to enhance the immense hush of the wilderness below. In his right hand, he held a small, polished earthenware vessel holding a low-burning pine resin torch, its warm, crimson flame casting a gentle, dancing glow across the intricate hieroglyphic glyphs carved into the stone walls of the tower. The air within the high pavilion was cool and remarkably fresh, filled with the rich, grounding aroma of wet tropical leaves, crushed cedar bark, and the clean, mineral scent of rain-washed limestone. To the old scholar, the massive stone tower was a sacred compass, a monumental axis that aligned human consciousness with the cosmic movements of the gods above. He reached the wide, open window of the observation chamber, resting his weathered hands on the smooth stone ledge to look out across the endless sea of green leaves that stretched toward the infinite horizon. Just below the tower, the great stone pyramids and palatial courtyards of the city rose like silent, pale phantoms out of the jungle mist, their brilliant stucco decorations softened by the gentle silver light of the midnight stars. The rainforest below breathed with a heavy, completely synchronized pulse, a continuous velvet murmur of rustling palm leaves and distant jungle rivers that acted as an eternal lullaby for the thousands of people sleeping deeply in their homes below. Cainish watched the brilliant cluster of the Pleiades move with absolute precision above the peak of the central temple, letting his own breathing match the slow, heavy rhythm of the universe, feeling the cool, misty air clearing the final remnants of earthly concern from his mind. He sat down upon a smooth mat of woven reeds, taking up a slender bone stylus and a long, folding book made of hammered wild fig tree bark, its pages covered in complex mathematical notations and red and black ink glyphs. With slow, graceful movements, he recorded the exact day of the cosmic alignment, the soft, sliding sound of the bone stylus against the bark paper acting as a repetitive, comforting whisper in the still pavilion. He looked up at the vast, star-filled vault and realized that his own life was a temporary but perfectly necessary step within the grand, cyclical wheel of time, a beautiful thread woven into the infinite tapestry of creation. There were no more rituals to perform tonight, no prophecies to interpret, and no heavy burdens to carry. The night had claimed the jungle, and like the ancient stones around him, his soul was invited to simply surrender to the natural state of rest, fading softly, deeply, into a beautiful, dreamless sleep. And as the dark green canopies of the ancient jungle smoothly fade into the deep indigo textures of the mind, the continuous nehir of our journey carries us far to the north, drifting over silent coastlines and emerald valleys, until we touch down softly along the edges of a majestic, glassy fjord in early medieval Scandinavia. The year was 920, and the deep waters of the northern inlet rested completely motionless under the ethereal, permanent glow of a midsummer midnight dusk. In these high latitudes, the sun does not truly abandon the earth. Instead, it hovers just below the horizon, painting the entire sky in a seamless, lingering tapestry of soft amber, deep rose, and pale violet that stretches from one peak to another in a timeless display of nature's quiet artistry. The absolute serenity of the waterfront settlement was immense, deep, and protective. The long, timber-framed longhouses, completely quiet beneath their blankets of green sod and wild moss. Leif, an elderly navigator and master boat builder, whose hands bore the smooth calluses of decades, spent guiding wooden ships across the uncharted Atlantic, sat quietly on the smooth cedar veranda of his workshop. The air smelled of fresh pine timbers, distilled birch tar, and the sharp, clean saltiness of the cold seawater lapping rhythmically against the wooden pilings of the dock below. In his lap, he held a small piece of dense whalebone and a small iron carving knife, using slow, methodical, and repetitive movements to shave the edges of a small sun compass he was crafting for the next generation of sailors. The gentle, sliding sliver of the knife against the bone was a hypnotic, comforting sound, a soft, whispering cadence that filled the small porch with a sense of profound focus and total inner alignment. He looked out at the glassy surface of the fjord, watching the perfect reflections of the snowy mountain peaks mirrored in the dark water, completely undisturbed by the winds or the passing days. He let his chest expand and contract in perfect harmony with the slow, rhythmic lapping of the tiny waves against the shore, feeling the cool, clean air of the northern summer clearing away any remaining alertness from his body. He knew that the grand voyages of his youth, the roaring storms of the open sea, and the busy noise of the crowded trading posts were nothing more than temporary moments passing through the great, unchanging landscape of the northern wilderness. This realization brought a deep, unyielding comfort to his heart, taking away the final burdens of his physical fatigue. He set down his carving tool, allowed his hands to rest completely open on his knees, and closed his eyes, listening to the soft sigh of the pine trees on the surrounding cliffs as the timeless twilight wrapped its protective blanket around his soul, inviting him to sink softly, deeply, into a beautiful, dreamless slumber. And as the whispering pines of the northern shores gracefully dissolve into the pale, timeless amber of a fading memory, the continuous, serene river of our journey winds seamlessly toward the ancient heart of the mystical Orient, drifting over vast plains of wild pomegranates and silver-threaded rivers, until we come to rest within a magnificent, turquoise-styled courtyard in the golden age of Isfahan. The year was 1140 of the Central Era, and the grand city of philosophers and poets slept profoundly beneath a deep, violet sky caked in the crystalline dust of a million desert stars. The absolute stillness of the royal gardens was immense, protective, and complete, a quiet universe where the heavy burdens of the day were forgotten beneath the slow, rhythmic turning of the celestial vault. Fahin, an elderly astronomer and master of the mathematical arts, walked with slow, unhurried steps along the geometric pathways of the courtyard, his long robes of fine indigo wool brushing softly against the cold, glazed bricks beneath his feet. In his right hand, he carried a delicate filigree brass lantern, its small candle flame casting a warm, dancing lattice of golden light across the intricate arabesque patterns covering the walls. The midnight air was remarkably crisp and clean, saturated with the grounding aroma of dried orange peel, crushed frankincense, and the subtle, cool freshness of mountain water flowing through the narrow stone channels of the garden. To the old scholar, the massive dome of the mosque rising above the courtyard was not a mere structure of stone and clay. It was a perfect, physical reflection of the heavens, its turquoise and sapphire tiles catching the faint silver light of the half-moon until it seemed to mirror the infinite depths of space itself. He reached the edge of a deep, starlit reflection pool in the center of the garden, resting his weathered hands upon the cool marble rim to watch the motionless water, letting his own breathing match the slow, silent rise and fall of the midnight wind. The pool was a perfect mirror, capturing the distant sparkle of the constellations without a single ripple, transforming the dark water into a safe, accessible sanctuary of cosmic order. He sat down upon a thick Persian carpet laid out within a pointed stone archway, taking up a heavy brass celestial globe and a slender reed pen. With slow, methodical movements, he began to trace the alignment of the stars upon a fresh sheet of smooth linen paper, the soft, sliding scratch of the pen acting as a repetitive, comforting whisper in the absolute silence of the night. He looked up at the vast cosmic ceiling and realized that his own passing days were a harmonious, beautifully protected part of a grand and eternal geometry, a single thread woven into a tapestry that had no beginning and no end. There were no difficult riddles to solve tonight, no complex equations to balance, and no heavy weights to carry. His work was completely finished, and the night had provided a sanctuary where his active thoughts could finally dissolve into the soft, protective shadows of the courtyard, allowing his body to rest completely unburdened as his eyes closed naturally, fading softly into a deep, dreamless sleep. And as the turquoise domes of Isfahan slowly merge into the infinite sapphire tapestry of the sleeping mind, our unhurried voyage lifts effortlessly over ancient trade routes, crossing the vast expanses of the world to rise high into the thin, sacred air of the majestic Andes Mountains. The year was 1510, and the stone citadel of the clouds, perched precariously between jagged peaks, slept profoundly beneath a heavy, velvet canopy of stars that seemed to touch the very edges of the earth. The absolute silence of the mountain kingdom was vast, reverent, and total, a high-altitude sanctuary where the passage of time was measured only by the slow, predictable shadows of the stone monoliths. Mater, an elderly priest and watcher of the sun, stood with slow, perfectly balanced steps upon the highest agricultural terrace of the citadel, his thick cloak, woven from soft alpaca, wool protecting him from the biting chill of the midnight air. The fabric of his cloak brushed softly against the rough, perfectly fitted granite blocks of the terrace wall, creating a faint, rhythmic cadence that blended into the immense hush of the wilderness. In his hand, he held a small, polished stone vessel holding a low-burning oil wick, its soft, golden flame casting a gentle, steady light over his weathered hands and the ancient stone beneath his feet. The mountain air was remarkably pure, sharp, and cold, filled with the rich, mineral scent of rain-washed granite, wild mountain grasses, and the distant, clean dampness of the Urubamba River roaring like a soft whisper thousands of feet below in the dark valley. To the old astronomer, these massive, mortarless stone temples were a living calendar, a monumental clock designed to align human consciousness with the cosmic movements of the constellations. He approached the Intihuatana stone, the sacred pillar that tied the sun to the earth, resting his palm against its cool, smooth surface to feel the deep, unyielding stability of the mountain. High above him, the silver band of the Milky Way stretched across the black sky like a brilliant river of stardust, its familiar dark constellations guiding his spirit into a state of total detachment and profound calm. He sat down upon a woven wool mat within the shelter of a stone doorway, taking up a small piece of dark obsidian and a smooth slate tablet to record the changing position of the winter stars. The soft, slow scratch of the stone against the tablet was a comforting, repetitive whisper, a rhythmic cadence that filled the small space with a sense of absolute focus and total inner alignment. He looked out at the silent peaks fading into the midnight mist and realized that his own life was a temporary but perfectly necessary step within the grand, cyclical wheel of the cosmos, safely anchored within a universe that knew exactly how to turn, how to rest, and how to renew itself. There were no more rituals to perform tonight, no celestial paths to track, and no heavy weights to balance. His day was done, and the night had wrapped its quiet, protective blanket around the mountains, allowing his soul to rest completely unburdened as he surrendered his consciousness to the deep, dark, and tranquil ocean of a dreamless slumber. And as the misty peaks of the sacred mountains quietly dissolve into the vast, dark velvet of the upper atmosphere, the continuous current of our journey carries us back across the Atlantic waters, entering the grand, stone-walled scriptoriums of Byzantine Constantinople. The year was 740, and the great imperial city, perched between two seas, slept profoundly beneath a deep, indigo sky caked in the radiant silver starlight of the Mediterranean. The absolute quietness of the high monastery galleries was immense, deep, and protective, a safe haven where the chaotic noise of empires and crowded markets simply ceased to exist. Lucas, an elderly iconographer and master scribe, walked with slow, unhurried steps along the marble corridor of his cell, his soft leather slippers making no sound against the polished stone beneath his feet. In his right hand, he carried a small earthenware lamp filled with scented olive oil, its steady, golden flame casting a warm, amber glow over the ancient plaster walls and the dark wooden beams of the ceiling. The air within the scriptorium was thick and deeply comforting, saturated with the rich aroma of melted beeswax, dried frankincense, and the clean, woody scent of old vellum pages waiting in the dark. To the old monk, this quiet room was a sanctuary of total peace, a place where the passage of time slowed down to a perfect, unhurried crawl. He approached his high wooden desk, where a magnificent, half-finished mosaic icon caught the reflection of his lamp. The tiny cubes of gold leaf, turquoise, and mother-of-pearl shimmering softly like distant stars in the midnight mist. He rested his weathered hands on the edge of the desk, looking through a narrow, arched window that opened out toward the dark, glassy waters of the Golden Horn. The sea below moved with a heavy, completely silent momentum, an unhurried current that reflected the cold sparkle of the constellations, completely undisturbed by the winds or the passing years. Lucas let his chest rise and fall in perfect synchronization with the quiet rhythm of the water, feeling the cool, salt-kissed evening breeze, clearing away the final remnants of his daily fatigue. He took up a slender bone stylus and a small block of gold leaf, using slow, methodical movements to press a delicate sheet of gold onto the wet plaster of the icon, the soft, sliding hiss of the tool acting as a repetitive, comforting whisper in the still room. He looked at the serene face of the icon and reflected on how the true beauty of existence was found not in the fleeting noise of the world, but in the quiet capacity to create a space of absolute stillness within one's own soul. There were no more pages to copy tonight, no more colors to mix, and no more lines to trace. His work was beautifully finished, and the darkness around him was a protective shield that no external worries could breach. He stepped away from his desk, walked slowly to his simple wooden cot in the corner of the room, and lay down beneath a soft woolen blanket, letting out a long, slow sigh of complete surrender as his eyelids grew heavy, guiding his spirit softly, deeply, into a beautiful, dreamless rest. And as the golden glints of the Byzantine mosaics softly fade into the quiet dark of the past, the continuous, flowing river of our journey carries us further northward, slipping effortlessly into a stone abbey built upon a rocky island off the mist-shrouded coast of medieval Normandy. The year was 1320, and the majestic stone arches of the mount slept profoundly beneath a heavy velvet canopy of stars that threw long, protective shadows over the swirling waters of the English Channel below. The absolute silence of the high monastic scriptorium was vast, reverent, and complete, an isolated sanctuary where the only movement was the slow, predictable rising of the ocean tide. Brother Thomas, an elderly illuminator whose eyes had grown dim from decades of working by candlelight, sat quietly at his heavy oak desk, his long woolen habit pooling around his chair in soft, undisturbed folds. The air within the stone chamber was thick with the nostalgic scent of crushed walnut ink, dried parchment, and the sharp, clean saltiness of the sea wind drifting through the high clerestory windows. In his hand, he carried a small, unadorned clay lamp, its tiny golden flame casting a warm, amber halo over his work, illuminating the intricate, hand-painted borders of a massive liturgical manuscript. To the old scribe, the heavy stone walls of the abbey were a magnificent shield, protecting his quiet life from the chaotic storms of the outside world, offering an infinite horizon of peace and total mental detachment. He leaned back slightly, listening to the rhythmic, deep thrum of the ocean waves crashing softly against the granite foundations of the rock below, a continuous velvet murmur that acted as an eternal lullaby for the entire island. The water moved with a heavy, predictable pulse, a natural breathing of the earth that had remained unchanged for thousands of years, anchoring his spirit in the absolute reality of the immediate present. He dipped his slender quill into a small well of deep lapis lazuli ink, adding a few delicate leaves to a complex geometric initial on the page. The soft, sliding sound of the nib against the textured vellum acting as a comforting, repetitive whisper in the still room. He looked at the vast, indigo sky framed by the stone window and realized that his own life was a tiny, beautifully necessary thread woven into the infinite fabric of a perfectly balanced universe. There were no more lines to write tonight, no more books to bind, and no more horizons to search across the earth. His day was done, and the night had provided a sanctuary where his mind could finally rest completely unburdened. He carefully closed the heavy volume, blew out the tiny flame of his lamp with a soft puff, and lay down upon his simple straw mattress, letting the silver moonlight wrap its quiet blanket around his soul as he faded softly, deeply, into a beautiful, dreamless sleep.